All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura Wilkins. I'm with the Floyd County Library and the Carnegie Center for Art and History. And we're so glad that you could join us today for today's Lunch and Learn program. We are joined today by Steve Higgs, and his program is on In the Natural State of Indiana. And I will tell you a little bit about Steve, and of course, he will tell you more about himself and his journeys in the natural state of Indiana as he goes through our presentation this afternoon. Stephen Higgs is an award-winning journalist and photographer who has written 2 state nature guides and a manuscript about rewilding the Hoosier National Forest. Of course, Earth Day this year is April 22nd, so our program today on April 20th is in honor of and exploring themes relating to Earth Day. Stephen's books are available for purchase through his website and blog called Natural Bloomington, which I'm sure he will tell us more about Natural Bloomington in the course of his talk this afternoon. And of particular interest, of course, to people in our area is his guide, A Guide to Natural Areas of Southern Indiana, 199 Unique Places to Explore. We will have time for questions at the end of Stephen's talk today. And as I said a few minutes earlier, this program is being recorded, so it will be available on the Carnegie Center's YouTube channel within a few days of this live event. So thank you again so much for joining us today. Again, this is our Lunch and Learn program with speaker Stephen Higgs in the state of Natural Indiana. So with that, Stephen, I will turn things over to you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Laura, for inviting me to speak here today. I'm really honored and humbled to be with you today. I'm also pretty grateful to be here. It's been a couple of years since I've been in touch with my nature work. It's been a couple of years since I woke up in the middle of the night with visions of nature swirling around in my head. I haven't been getting a whole lot of sleep this week because it keeps waking me up, but I'm really appreciative of the opportunity to do this. And as Laura said, the Earth Day theme this year is Restore Our Earth. And so I want to talk about my latest project, which is called Rewilding Southern Indiana, the Hoosier National Forest. I'm going to share with you in story and image my half-century love affair with the Hoosier National Forest, as well as its half-billion-year history. A couple of caveats here. I've been giving nature talks and slideshows since the Dean Wilderness was established in 1982. This is the first one I've ever done on Zoom. I've never done one when I was quite this old, so I'm got my fingers crossed that things are going to go pretty okay here today. But I want to start by talking a little bit about my personal journey with the Hoosier and with nature. The Hoosier issue, the Hoosier story is actually reflects my lifelong love of the woods, which I trace back to my childhood when I used to play Army and climb trees in a little patch of central Indiana hardwoods across the street from my Aunt Thelma's house on East 18th Street up in Indianapolis. When I became a teenager and got my license, we spent a lot of time piling in my car and driving out to the woods northeast of Indianapolis to get away from the city and go to the woods. For those of you who might be familiar with Indianapolis, Fall Creek Parkway and Geist Reservoir were 2 of our favorite destinations. And in those days, those were way, way out in the country. There wasn't much development out there at all. When I came to IU as a freshman in 1969, the first place that I really felt a connection to here was the Dunn Woods on the IU campus. I moved into the Pike Kappa Alpha House on East 3rd Street when I came to IU. And Dunn Woods was midway between the house and the record stores and restaurants downtown. Appropriately here, as we're preparing for another 17-year cicada invasion, I have very vivid memories of the 17-year cicada emergence in 1970, of walking along the edge and walking through Dunn Woods to the sounds of screaming trees and crunching shells under my feet. As Laura said in her promo piece, I randomly discovered the environment while walking through Dunn Meadow one day my freshman year on the first Earth Day in 1970. To be honest, I just kind of fell in love with the word environment from my little time I spent there. I don't have a lot of specific memories from that day, But a year later, I took a class called Society, Heredity, and the Environment, which was taught by a Nobel Prize winning professor. And I ended up spending my entire lifetime immersed in the subject of the environment. If you read Laura's synopsis, you've got a pretty good idea of my career as an environmental writer, but I'll just give you the main highlights here. I spent 11 years as an environmental writer at the Bloomington Herald-Times, 4 years as a senior environmental writer and editor at the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, 2 years as a columnist at the Bloomington Independent, 10 years as editor and publisher of the Bloomington Alternative. I also authored 3.5 books during that over the past 30 years. Eternal Vigilance, 9 Tales of Environmental Heroism was published in 1996 by IU Press. A Guide to Natural Areas of Southern Indiana was published in 2016, and A Guide to Natural Areas of Northern Indiana was published in 2019. The half book is actually Rewilding Southern Indiana, the Hoosier National Forest, which I've written, but it hasn't been published. I'll tell you more about that here in a few minutes. My personal first contact with the Hoosier National Forest, I didn't really realize I was where I was. It was in 1975. I'd started my adult life in a tiny little shack out on Night Ridge Road, about 10 miles southeast of Bloomington, way out in the country. Those of you who might know Lake Monroe, if you know where the Scenic View restaurant is, that's pretty much where I lived. I was the first house to the north of the Scenic View restaurant there. Lake Monroe, of course, the state's largest lake, lay 3/4 of a mile to the east from our back door by a trail that we spent a lot of time hiking and photographing and camping down by the lake. The lake was 2.5 miles down the road to the south by road. And the first Hoosier National boundary line was 1.25 miles down from our house there. On that little old house and that edge of that great big woods out there is when I actually became a photographer. I set up my first permanent serious darkroom in that room, and I discovered my photo muses, Edward Weston, Elliott Porter, Ansel Adams, and Bill Thomas. My first contact with the Hoosier, as I said, I wasn't quite sure, didn't really know that I was there, but it was that same year in May of 1975, a friend of mine, an Eagle Scout buddy named Tim Huffman, worked down at the fishing shed on Lake Monroe, and a part of his job was renting boats down there. So he and I took a boat trip out onto the lake there. I mean, I knew it was 10 feet above pool. It was really swollen. It was May. They were holding the water back at that time. But as I said, I didn't really know that the southern border of Lake Monroe is basically the Hoosier National Forest. So when we briefly docked on the shore that day and got out to stretch our legs, that was actually the first time I ever set foot on the Hoosier National Forest. That was my first contact with it. That was also the first time that I ever shot a photo, the first of thousands of photos. So I'm going to show those to you here right now. Let me share the screen. This is my buddy, Tim. We are heading away from the shore. This is the Hoosier National Forest back on the edge there. This dead tree was probably in the Hoosier because, again, the water is up about 10 feet. And this is actually the first abstract photograph that one of the first abstract photographs that I ever took. My wife, when I lived out on 446 there, was an abstract artist. So I was always interested in abstract art, and that was really probably the first one that I shot. The next year, in 1976, I knowingly shot my first photos of the Hoosier when Tim and I went out to a place called Nebo Ridge. Everybody was talking about Nebo Ridge in those days. I didn't really know much about it, and the guy took us out there, and I remember him talking about wilderness. But I had my camera with me, and I was taking photographs. And I knew it was a special place, but I really wasn't paying attention to why, and I wouldn't learn why for a couple more years. In the fall of 1978, 3 years later, I was freelancing, selling cameras downtown on Kirkwood and Bloomington when a guy came in by the name of Bill Thomas. Bill was a fallen newspaper man who'd been the 1976 National Geographic Nature Photographer of the Year. He came in to leave some flyers about a nature photography seminar he was teaching out at his home in Brown County. So I took that seminar with him that fall. Of course, beautiful fall colors out in Brown County. Bill had published 3 coffee table books. One was called The American Rivers, another was called The Swamp, and the other one was called The Island, all 3 of which I still have on my coffee table today. And because of Bill's encouragement and his inspiration, I enrolled in 3 years later, I enrolled in the master's program at the IU School of Journalism to study photojournalism. And as you can imagine, I had dreams of National Geographic spreads and oversized, vividly colored coffee table books like Bill had done. I also remember Bill gave a slideshow out in Ellettsville, I think after the American Rivers book came out. So I kind of had those goals in mind as somebody who was getting serious about photography. So when in the early 80s, when I had just started enrolled in graduate school, my wife, Judy, at the time, kind of told me, you need to get out of the house. You need to get out of here. You need to go to a Sierra Club meeting or something like that. So I ended up going to a Sierra Club meeting at the Monroe County Public Library, where this guy named Jeff Stant was on the stage. This very passionate, very charismatic guy was on stage talking about something called the Salt Creek Wilderness in the Hoosier National Forest. So I went up and I talked to Jeff after that meeting, really got engaged with the Hoosier at that point in time, and became the Upland Group Sierra Club's newsletter editor. I was going into journalism, and so that seemed like a logical thing. To this day, Jeff thinks we put out newsletters at that time. We actually didn't. We never really got around to it. But that was in the middle of the fight over the Charles Dean Wilderness, which I'll go into in a little more detail in a minute here. But one of the things I remember about that was when it was established, and we had the dedication for the Dean Wilderness out in the Hoosier there. I drove a guy named Jeff Burnham, who'd been U.S. Senator Richard Lugar's one of his top aides, and one of the main people who had really intervened to get the Charles Dean Wilderness established in southern Indiana there. While I was in journalism school, I discovered I could write. And while I was there in 1985, the U.S. Forest Service released a National Forest Management Plan for the Hoosier National Forest that called for clear cutting 81% of the Hoosier National Forest over a 120-year period. Basically, they were going to cut the entire forest down every 100 years, let it regrow and continue it be in a continuous process of growing and cutting and growing and cutting. Well, my first investigative piece that I ever wrote was in graduate school, and I wrote my final master's project. It was called Clear Cutting the Hoosier National Forest, Professional Forestry or Panacea. Then I went to work, when I got out of there, I went to work at the Bloomington Herald-Times, where I picked up and covered that story to its logical conclusion. By 1992, the clear-cutting plan had been completely withdrawn. The forest supervisor who had proposed it had left. A new guy who represented a new sort of era of what he called amenities-based forestry, he took over. And by 1992, that clear-cutting plan had been replaced by a plan that was considered one of the most ecologically sensitive in the United States. It was actually written by the Hoosier Environmental Council with Jeff Stant, who was the president of HEC at that time. He hired a guy named Jeff St. Clair, who to this day is still one of my best friends. Jeff St. Clair wrote the 1992 revision of the plan. And to this day, with some modifications, that plan still controls management in the Hoosier National Forest. Significant chunks of the Hoosier, anywhere from 33 to 40% of it, are completely off limits to logging now. There's no ORV trails, but I'll talk about that here in a little bit. After I've been practicing journalism for 30 years, I didn't write only about nature and the beauty that nature provides us. There weren't many environmental issues that I didn't explore. I wrote extensively about toxic chemicals. The other thing that I wrote about when I was in graduate school was PCB contamination in Bloomington. I wrote extensively about toxic chemicals, their impact on human health, especially their impact on developing children, on children's developing systems. And I have to tell you, by 2013, I was pretty tired of that. I've been doing it for about 30 years, and I just sort of decided I'm done with the dark side of the environment. I just really can't deal with it anymore. And for quite a while there, I'd been sort of drifting that direction. And I thought one of the thoughts I'd had was giving environmental tours, sort of a good and bad and ugly sort of a tour of Bloomington. I asked a friend once if he thought people would pay for such a tour where I'd show them PCB and toxic waste dumps in the Hoosier National Forest and nature. And of course, his response was, well, yeah, I think people would enjoy and pay for nature tours. I don't think they'd really want to see toxic waste dumps. So with that in the back of my mind, I've always taught at the journalism school part-time to underwrite my nature work and to pay my bills so I can do the kind of work that I really wanted to do. And as Laura mentioned in her write-up for this piece here, sort of a life-changing event happened for me in the spring of 2013 at a midterm conference with one of my students. A Chinese girl, at that time, Chinese students were just starting to really come here. Jane Zhang was one of my first Chinese students. And so at our midterm conference that semester, she was the last one on the list. So we ended up sitting and talking for about a half an hour instead of the allotted 15 minutes. And one of the things that she told me was that when she was a child, one of her favorite things to do was, sorry, I'm going to share here. One of her favorite things to do was to go to the mountains with her grandpa, who was a photographer. So I'm a grandpa and I'm a photographer. My granddaughter and grandson have gone with me to many trips in the woods. So I told Jingy, this is Jingy, that after the semester was over, I'd take some of her and her friends out. So one of the places we went with a Hoosier, this is her friend named Mongwei. We went up to the fire tower down out on Hickory Ridge. And this was basically the first of 4 years of what I call Bloomington, Natural Bloomington Eco Tours and More. I started these eco tours with Jingy and Mongwei that day. And over the next 4 years, I led a couple of hundred people to the woods and back. This is my friend that was my friend Elaine and her friend Amy and their kids. This is a group of students from the Oxfam Club at IU that I took in 2015. This was my favorite, everybody's favorite. I'm locked up here. In 2016, I gave a tour to the American Council for the Blind chapter here in Bloomington. My technical support guy, since I started publishing online back in the late 1990s, is blind. And he contacted me, he's an active member of this group, and asked if I would be willing to lead an eco tour with these folks. And I said, sure, that sounded fun. The Bloomington Herald-Times actually came along and wrote a story about it. And one of the more interesting things about this one was I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to take them places with smells and sounds and things that don't require visuals. But when I got there, what they actually told me was, no, we want you to tell us what you see. So this was really a great one. This was really fun. I enjoyed that one. It was just amazing to take those kids out there and well, folks, they weren't all kids, some of them were. Then in 2017, this gentleman here, these are the Westons, no relation to Edward Weston, the photographer. He's a Google engineer, and he came to Bloomington to speak at the Luddy School of Informatics. And his wife set up this eco tour. So I took this couple from California and took them on a tour here in Bloomington. Okay, let me stop. Okay, so from that first eco tour actually started the path that led me here today. Shortly after I started doing those, I mean, one of the and more piece of Natural Bloomington and More was the naturalbloomington.com website, where I posted a travel blog and photo gallery of my 5-year exploration here. I've got almost 200 travel logs from my trip through all of Indiana, over 5,000 photos. Flickr cuts me off at 5,000. I don't know exactly how many I actually have on there. But shortly after I launched the naturalbloomington.com, an editor at IU Press named Linda O'Black reached out to me. She said that she had been publishing a series of nature guides on Indiana. She'd done one book on karst country in southern Indiana. She'd done another one on the Knobstone Trail, which I'll talk more about here in a couple of minutes. And she basically said to me, if you're going to be doing this anyway, why don't we do a book? Well, my first book hadn't exactly been an overwhelming success. I mean, it was very gratifying. I'm an author. People lined up for my autograph. That was all really cool. But I'd really decided that I didn't want to do any more books as a result of that one until she mentioned this. And I thought, this is a way to sell some books, perhaps, to get published again. If nothing else, I can write off all of my travel expenses, which I was able to do, and which was great. But 3 years after she sent me that email, in their spring 2016 catalog, IU Press published a guide to natural areas of southern Indiana, 119 unique places to explore. People have often asked me why 119. Well, the truth is, it was actually 120. And at the last minute, I realized that one of the places that I had in the book was actually Northern Indiana, by my definition, even though it was south of US 70, which was kind of my line of demarcation. So at the very last second, rather than add another one, I just deleted one of them, and that's how it became this odd number of 119. Well, that turned out to be Linda's last project at IU Press. She left, and then when her successor came over at the first time that I met with him, he told me, of course, doing a Northern Indiana book was a no-brainer. So I immediately got a contract for the Northern Indiana book. But he also mentioned that he would like to do something, publish a book about rewilding Indiana. Well, I told him that after my 40 years, 35 years of writing about the environment, that I'm pretty sure that what could possibly be rewilded in the state of Indiana already has been. I work very, very closely with the folks at the Division of Nature Preserves up at DNR to make sure in my guidebooks I'm not telling people to go to incredibly sensitive places and places that human beings shouldn't go to. So I knew a lot about it, and I knew that really, as Mike Hamoya from the Division of Nature Preserves had told me, there was a lot of things that we can add, but there's really no place where you can just go out there and completely redo the Indiana landscape. So instead, I told him about the Hoosier National Forest. I said, I've been writing about this place for 30 years. And basically what has happened over the long-term history of the Hoosier National Forest is that it has been rewilded. It's an example of how Indiana was rewilded at one time. And so I proposed to him that I do a full color coffee table book, a la Bill Thomas, on the Hoosier National Forest and tell the story about the Hoosiers' history, about its entire history, how it had been completely devastated in the 19th century and basically destroyed, and how it's been rewilded over the past 50 years. And he agreed. So from that meeting, that one lunch that we had up at Lenny's up on 10th Street, I came away with that from 2 book contracts. So from 2013 to 2017, I researched and explored and photographed altogether 244 natural protected areas in Indiana. And in 2017, I wrapped up the Northern Indiana book and started to work on the Hoosier book. The first actually official thing that I did on the book, although the Hoosier is a big part of the Southern Indiana book, it's the largest chapter there. So while I technically started the book on the Southern Indiana book here, I really marked the beginning of working on this book with a September 2017 hike with Mike that I had started the year before with the Hoosier Sierra Club, where I led tours with Hoosier National Forest Supervisor Mike Chavez. And in June 2019, 2 years later, I submitted 150 photographs and a 30-word manuscript to IU Press for the Rewilding Southern Indiana book. Now, to be honest, I knew I was lucky to have gotten that contract. And I chalk it up to timing. Not only was Alan a new editor there, but there was a new director of IU Press who was anxious to get the contract signed and get people to working. So my timing was just right to get that book contract. But at the same time, I was a little surprised that they could afford to publish a full color 150-page oversized coffee table book, given the state of the world today, especially in the digital world. Of course, books don't sell much anymore, tragically, I think. After I got my contract, another friend of mine suggested a book to them on the Indiana's Magnificent Trees, and they initially asked him to raise $20,000 to publish that book. So they ended up agreeing to a lot less, and that book ended up not happening for reasons we don't need to talk about here. But when I got an email in December of 2019 from IU Press telling me that they couldn't afford to publish Rewilding, I wasn't really surprised. Like I said, I'd been surprised all the way along that they could and would actually want to do that. So that kind of fell apart, and it wasn't that bad because it's actually an unfinished story, as I will tell here in a few minutes. I wasn't really ready for publication. They asked me if they wanted to do it in black and white. They really wanted to do the book. They just couldn't afford the full color, but black and white just really wasn't my Bill Thomas dream, my coffee table book dream. So I told them, no, I'll decline. They let me keep the advance that they gave me. So that's how I got to the state of rewilding Southern Indiana today. This is actually the first time that this has been presented in public as an entity. I mean, there's lots of blogs and photographs and everything on the naturalbloomington.com site, but this is really the first time that anybody's really seen this. So I am going to share the screen one more time and start a slideshow. I'm going to be stopping and starting and talking over this some. Let me get the, okay. So rewilding the Hoosier National, Southern Indiana, the Hoosier National Forest. Let me tell you a little bit about the Hoosier before I get it started here. The Hoosier is by far the wildest and largest public land holding in the state of Indiana. It was established in 1951, the year that I was born. It's owned and managed by the U.S. Forest Service, which of course is a division of the U.S. federal government. It's 204,000 acres today, which is more than all of Indiana's 15 state forests combined. It's 4 times larger than the second largest nature preserve in the state of Indiana, which is the 50,000 acre Big Oaks National Wildlife Refuge, just north of you folks in Jefferson County. If you know about that one, you know that's one of the most interesting places in the state of Indiana. Of course, it used to be a place where the Air Force, or I forget who it was, tested bombs there. So before you can go hiking in Big Oaks, you have to watch a video and sign a whole bunch of forms saying that you understand that there are live bombs inside that nature preserve that could go off. Could talk a lot about that, but we'll keep moving here. Talk more about the Hoosier. The Hoosier, of course, is not, as state highway and GPS maps suggest, these 2 big, massive blocks of Indiana that stretch south from Monroe Lake down through 9 counties to the Ohio River. Those cartographic and digital slabs of green really represent the Hoosier's purchase area, which is 644,000 acres in southern Indiana, in which the Forest Service could acquire land for the National Forest. So today, less than 1/3 of the actual purchase area, less than 1/3 of those big green slabs on the maps are actually Hoosier National Forest. Okay, and in fact, the rugged, unglaciated hill country that the Hoosier is composed of is one of the most fragmented national forests in the entire nation. I believe Mike Chavez told me that the Hoosier National Forest has more boundary line with private property than any other national forest in the country. And that land base runs the gamut from isolated parcels of a couple hundred acres to contiguous tracts that encompass tens of thousands of acres, like Nebo Ridge, Charles Dean Wilderness, Hickory Ridge areas here in the north, and Mogan Ridge and German Ridge down in the south, a little closer to you folks here. So let me start the slideshow here, and I'm going to talk over it and hope my timing works enough here. Okay. This is Brown County, Little Blue Creek in Brown County. This is Browning Mountain, rugged upland forest. This is Miller Ridge in Brown County, forest floor. The Charles Dean Wilderness area in Monroe County, which has, of course, that's a picture of a seasonal creek there. These are some of the landforms. These are in what is called the Highland Rim Natural Region in Indiana. This is the northern part, the Brown County Hills and that sort of thing. The other is the Shawnee Hills Natural Region, which is to the west, which includes the Pioneer Mothers Memorial Forest. This is the Lost River down by Pawpaw Marsh, Hemlock Cliffs in Crawford County. More of Hemlock Cliffs in Crawford County. Sandstone, beautiful. This is the Haskins Tract, which I'll talk more about. This is in northern Perry County. So those are some of the landforms that the Hoosier National represents. Of course, it represents 1 million more, but those are just a cross-section of them. So I want to talk about life on the Hoosier here. The 500 million year life on the Hoosier here. 570 million years ago, give or take, Indiana, southern Indiana, and the state of Indiana was part of the southern Indiana was part of a shallow tropical sea called the Devonian Sea. And the landmass that we sit on here, the North American tectonic plate, was actually situated down around the mouth of the Amazon River, down around where Manaus, Brazil is. Through the years, as crustaceans, as little critters, as shell creatures died and their shells and all that calcium settled to the floor, that's actually the foundation of the belt of sandstone that runs from southern Monroe County all the way down to the Ohio River. That is made up of billions and billions of little creatures who died, and their shells turned into limestone that we mine today. That's in the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C., in the Empire State Building, et cetera. So as the tectonic plates of the earth shifted over the millions and hundreds of millions of years, we ended up here in North America, where we're pretty much at today. Of course, the dinosaurs we're almost certainly we're here, okay, 245 million to 66 million years ago. Scientists say there's no question that they actually roamed here, but there's actually no evidence of that because of the Ice Age, which began 2 million years ago and ended anywhere from 10 to 15,000 years ago. Indiana Geological Survey has called the Ice Age having the most profound effect on the landscape and natural environment since the dinosaurs. They say that about 18 sheets of ice glaciers covered the entire state of Indiana at different times. The most recent was the Wisconsin sheet, which was 70,000 years ago to about 10,000 years ago, which formed the Ohio River and the landscape that we have today. I know I was taught in high school that the hill country of southern Indiana was land that was pushed ahead of the glaciers. Well, that turns out to not be true. The Hoosier National Forest was actually not glaciated. The landforms, the hills and hollers that we have here today were actually formed by erosion from the melting ice sheets as they receded and headed south. So back to the slideshow here. That, of course, created the Ohio River. And what was happening in those days is as the ice sheets receded and as the giant game of the day, the mastodons and all those massive creatures were following the ice sheets, populations of hunters and gatherers were following them up the river. And one of the places that they stopped that we know that they were was at Monroe Point, which is the picture of the Ohio River that I just showed here a couple of minutes ago. As you can see, it looks like the folks were there 7,500 years or so ago. There's evidence of them there. This is from Rock House Hollow, which is in Perry County, just up from the Ohio River there. This is another place where they found actual evidence of human habitation 5,000, 7,000 years ago. I mean, no one knows for sure, but this is one of the oldest, one of the places, those are two of the places in the state of Indiana where we know that hunters and gatherers were there 7,000 years or so ago. The Hoosier archaeologists told me there's actually cave paintings in a terrace on the Ohio River, but they're not really sure if those still existed because of the river rising and falling all the time. Nobody really knows if they're still there or not. So the hunter-gatherers were here in those days. All of the rock shelters, this is from Hemlock Cliffs, all of the rock shelters in southern Indiana, whether they've been excavated or not, there's absolute no doubt that these were used for shelter by hunters and gatherers back in those days. This is the Lick Creek in Orange County. I'm sorry, but the hunters and gatherers were the Paleo-Indian period. Lick Creek was the site of an Oliver village about 1,300 to 1,400 years ago, where excavations have shown that there was a settlement there with houses that were formed in a circular area just to the left here, just to the left of the creek is where the excavation was. This is the Pioneer Mothers National Memorial Forest, which to me, this picture in here to me suggests the spirit of those Native Americans are still here. Those earliest settlers are still here. We'll talk more about this. The Pioneer Mothers is the largest stand of native old growth hardwood timber in the state of Indiana. It's down just south of Paoli. This is a Lick Creek with my grandson, future generations here moving forward. So let's talk about the historic life once the white folks got here. The flood of southern Indiana, the flood of settlers that came across at the falls of the Ohio down there close to you folks in New Albany here, followed the Buffalo Trace. The Buffalo Trace was an old Indian trail that led from the falls of the Ohio there at Louisville to over to Vincennes and the Wabash River. And it had been used forever by Native Americans. And so when the white settlers started to move up into southern Indiana, they hiked along this. This is the trail that they actually hiked on. This is one of my Sierra Club hikes that I led. This is still the trail. When we get to the top of this hill, I'm told that the old trace actually cuts off goes uphill, whereas this leads on down to the lake. Pioneers settled all over the place. This is Kings Ridge, which is just a random place that I drove one winter down in Lawrence County. take a right off of, I took a right off of US 50 west of Bedford there. I just drove up around, and there's lots of houses and stuff in there, but there's still little isolated patches of the Hoosier up in there, and lots of old cemetery sites. This is from Elkinsville, which is in Brown County, right down below Browning Mountain that I showed you a couple of minutes ago. Elkinsville was actually flooded for Lake Monroe. It does not exist anymore. Elkinsville, let me see here. Elkinsville was founded in the 1850s, and in the early 60s, it was flooded out. Something that a lot of people don't realize was that there were a lot of African-American settlements in antebellum Indiana. Before the Civil War, lots of African Americans started migrating north. They would travel with Quakers who would protect them. One such group landed in just above the Lick Creek. This is called the Lick Creek African American Settlement, where a thriving settlement of African Americans was established in the pre-Civil War. The family were called two of the families were the Thomas and Roberts families. There was a small grave site there. This is one of the stones there. Most of them are unmarked. This is not promoted by the Hoosier National Forest. You really have to know where it is. If you get to the point where it is, it's way off the trail. If you actually get there, then there's a little sign that points to it. Actually, one of the hikes, the first hike we did with Mike Chavez, we hiked down here. But by the 1860s, most of the African Americans had fled. They started fleeing about that time. Nobody really knows when or why or how. Well, they know when, but they really don't know why. I think it was probably pretty obvious why. But they started fleeing the state, and these settlements were all over the state of Indiana, not just in southern Indiana. But obviously, with the country building up to the Civil War, that certainly had to have an impact. But the settlers who came up represented had a lot of different lifestyles. This is the Rickenball House, which is a special place according to the Hoosier, down on in Perry County. The Rickenballs were a family. They very ambitious family. They farmed. They had a tannery. Their house that they built there in the 1860s. Let me see. I think it was the 1860s. Let me double check. 1850, they purchased it in 1854, built that stone house in 1874. As you can see, Jacob was born in 1822 and died in 1910. So they were one of the more successful families. This is the Waldrop cabin on Lake Monroe, just about 15 miles from where I sit here. When I first started going to this house back in the 90s, it was fully intact and you could climb up into the attic of the place. It was settled in the 1870s by Joshua Waldrop family. They were a fairly successful family. This is right up above the Salt Creek. Today it's Lake Monroe, but in those days it was right up above the Salt Creek. And you could actually climb up into the attic, and I know many of you probably are aware that newspapers were used for insulation back in these days. And when we were up there in the 1990s, we got to read newspapers from the early 1900s that had, for example, advertisements for Model T Fords. Now, the Waldrop cabin through the years has fallen into disrepair. We could talk about how that happened. Some of us aren't happy about this. Today, it's about to fall down, which is really a shame because it was a great little piece of Americana. This is the Brooks cabin. This cabin was actually built on the Little Blue River down in Crawford County. It was moved up to the edge of the Dean Wilderness now. It's located there where the kind of the visitor center is. This one was built, I think, in the 1890s. The Waldrop was in the 1870s. Here's the inside. It's preserved now. However, I'm going to stop here for a second and tell a little bit more of the story. So let me stop the thing here. Let's talk a little bit about the history here. Basically what happened in the 1860s, the sawmill arrived in southern Indiana. Well, let me back up. In 1790, the number of souls, quote unquote, from a census tract at the time, living at Clarksville by the Rapids, quote unquote, was 60 people. 60 years later, New Albany had 8,100 people. Bloomington had 1,300 people. And in 1860, the sawmill arrived in the region, which basically spelled the doom for southern Indiana and what is today's Hoosier National Forest. By 1900, Indiana led the nation in timber production. Sustainability, nothing like that existed in those days. In 1900, the Charles Dean Wilderness Area, which is 12,000 acres today, had 81 farms and 57 miles of road. This is some of the most forbidding landscape in the entire state of Indiana, and there were 57 miles of road and 12,000 acres of the Charles Dean Wilderness. So as the timber disappeared, as the logging companies sold the timber, the settlers basically discovered that the Hoosier National hills and hollers were really only good for growing trees. And the upland ecosystems basically crashed. By 1900, by the turn of the century, game like deer and wild turkey were gone. People were relying upon squirrels and rabbits for their sustenance as opposed to deer and wild turkey. In 1935, a survey showed that 99% of Crawford County, 95% of Orange County, and 92% of Brown County suffered from sheet erosion and gullying. In 1911, the Weeks Act allowed establishment of national forests to protect the waterways. And in 1935, the Indiana General Assembly passed enabling legislation for the Hoosier National Forest to be, for the Benjamin Harrison National Forest to be established, and that happened in 1951, as I said. So for the next so for the next 50 years, the Hoosier National Forest basically rewilded. The lookout tower was built to watch for what forest fires, and the forest is basically allowed to go back to nature, to revert to nature here. It was managed for wildlife like snakes, eastern box turtles, camping, horseback riding, recreation of all sorts. This is my granddaughter at the Hickory Ridge Trail. Horse riders let them do it. Hiking. Oh. Sorry about that. This is an eco tour I led out on Miller Ridge. And nature study. This is Cheryl Munson, who's an archaeologist at IU. And when Earth Day came along, basically, okay, I am going to just let this run here because I see I've talked a lot. So I'm just going to talk about the things as we go here. This is the Charles Dean Wilderness Area. This is the view from the lookout tower. This is the only federally protected wilderness in the state of Indiana. It literally would take an act of Congress to build or develop anything in the Hoosier National Forest, in the Charles Dean Wilderness Area. It's on the south shore of Lake Monroe, essentially where Tim and I first embarked there. The Forest Service has what they call special places. Sundance Lake and Mains Pond are over in Brown County. There are a couple fishing holes that they built. The Hickory Ridge Lookout Tower has 131 steps. It's 1,000 feet above sea level. Offers a magnificent sunsets. Wesley Chapel Gulf is one place where the Lost River is actually exposed. The Lost River is a river that runs 23 miles underground. It's been described as an subterranean Grand Canyon. This is the Pioneer Mothers. Again, this is 88 acres of virgin timber. The largest hardwood virgin timber in the country. Springs Lake Valley Lake. This is over in Orange County. Recreation, hunting, camping, fishing, boating. Hemlock Cliffs is sandstone box canyon down in Crawford County, one of my favorite places, waterfalls. Another rock, this is a rock shelter behind the waterfalls there. Up the trail a little bit, if you take a right off the spur, is Messamore Falls, which I actually think is prettier and better, more exciting than Hemlock. Buzzard Roost is down on the Ohio River. It's a little small recreation area there. Indian Salina Lake is a recreation area over in Perry County on Highway 37. Offers hiking and camping, fishing, hunting. Haskins Tract is a small area, an old ag field down in Perry County that they have replanted with native species and pollinators. This is Mike Chavez, who took over in 2014. I'd like to talk more about his thing here, but as I say, we're running out of time, so I'll just let this show tell itself. We're going to go from the north to the south. This is just a photo gallery. This is called the Turnpike. The Knobstone Trail is the longest hiking trail at 58 miles in Indiana. That's a dogtooth violet, of course. The Knobstone Trail, these are some of the old pine trees that were planted back to restore the land in the 30s. Nebo Ridge is in Brown County. It's a 6-mile hiking trail out there. The Middle Fork of the Salt Creek in Brown County. This is Browning Mountain. Nobody knows how these stones got there. This has been called Indiana's Stonehenge. This is a rugged ridge top in Brown County. Miller Ridge is just above Lake Monroe in southwest Brown County. Pade Hollow is on Highway 446, just down from the house I lived in back in the 70s. It's got a hiking trail. This is the Waldrop Ridge. Virginia Bluebells. Lake Monroe, looking out across from Hardin Ridge, which is a recreation area in southern Indiana. Pike Pond. I'll tell you what, I see that we're about out of time, so I think I will cut the slideshow short and just open it up for questions here. Sorry, I didn't get that far. I didn't mean to talk that much, but when you get started, you never know what's going to happen. So I'm happy to answer any questions or anything that you all want to talk about.
Well, I have a question,
Sure.
Steve. So, obviously with the pandemic, you were not able to lead as many tours for a period of time. But as we get back, hopefully to more normal circumstances, how often do you lead these eco tours as part of Natural Bloomington?
Well, actually, I haven't really led any for 3 or 4 years now. It's not that I wouldn't. If people wanted to do it, I would, but I sort of gave that up when I started writing the book because I didn't have really the time to do them both.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah, but if anybody would ever like to come up for a hike, I'm more than happy to take people out.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
How do we get in touch with you?
Naturalbloomington.com.
Okay.
You can go there. You will find my email. Laura has it if anything would happen there, but naturalbloomington.com is my website. I'm actually Bloomington Alternative at gmail.com. Bloomington Alternative, all one word. Gmail.com is my direct email address if the Natural Bloomington doesn't work anymore.
Steven, I've heard a lot of discussion about different trails that's going to combine throughout Indiana to make a huge area. And of course, you know about the Origin Park and all of that stuff and the different trails that have started down there. Are you helping and working with them to develop this? I mean, this is fantastic, what I know about it.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'm not really, but I know that there are trails I've been to trails like this all over Indiana. The Knobstone, of course, is the longest in the state. It starts at Monroe here by me and goes all the way down to the Dean Lake. It's 58 miles. And I know that there are trails like that up around Muncie. There's one up there. There are trails all over the state that people are constantly trying to connect and make them longer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I was covering the environment back at the Herald Times is when rail trails first started, and there was tremendous opposition to rail trails. I mean, tremendous opposition to them. But over time, the opposition has sort of relented. They realize that having people coming through their area is economic development. It promotes their communities. So hopefully we've gotten past that kind of resistance.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Sorry, I need to unmute myself. We have a couple questions in the chat, Steve.
Okay.
Let's see. Our first one is from Heather. What do you think is the most critical environmental protection for our state now?
Right now, I didn't really get to it. I think that certainly the biggest issue that I'm aware of, but certainly on the Hoosier National Forest, is that Mike Chavez has proposed clear cutting. The Forest Service thinks that old trees are unhealthy. And there's a place called Houston South, which is in Jackson County, where they think the trees are too big and they want to clear cut and cut some of them out. That is actually in the Lake Monroe watershed. Lake Monroe provides drinking water to over 100,000 people in 4 or 5 counties here. So the Monroe County government and environmental groups, including the Sierra Club, have actually sued them, the Forest Service, to not cut those trees. And right now that is in the hands of a federal judge, and we're waiting on an answer. So that's really the hottest environmental issue that I can cite.
Okay, and we have another question in the chat from Jamie. Where does the book Rewilding Southern Indiana stand at this point? Did I miss that? Are all these beautiful places you've mentioned and shown us today in the slideshow in your guidebooks?
The Hoosier National, most of the places are in the guidebook. The Rewilding book would have had a lot more images there. Rewilding, as I said, it's written. I actually submitted it to IU Press when they decided not to publish it. So it's been written, but it's not been published. And like I said, it was actually because of Houston South, that was where it ended. And I really wanted a better ending. Then it's in the hands of a judge. Because this is really kind of hearkening back to the old days with the fights over clear cutting. And like I say, the Monroe County Health Department, Monroe County Environmental Commission, our county commissioners and county council, along with a variety of groups, Hoosier Environmental Council and others, filed a lawsuit. And so we're just waiting to see what's going to happen there.
Any other questions or comments for our speaker today?
If not, if you'd all want to bear with me, I could just go ahead and finish the slideshow. There's only 2 or 3 minutes left on it.
I do have a quick comment in the chat from Mary. She asked if you could talk about naturalizing fields with pollinators. We're structuring about 70 acres in Harrison County in a state regulated conservation program, Lake, Forest, and Fields, and have been advised to use Roundup to establish pollinator fields. We also have beehives, but are conflicted about using herbicides.
That's one of the big questions in land restoration, is whether or not to use chemicals of any kind. I mean, my natural instinct is to say no. I think nature should be allowed to be nature. I think the pine trees are natural now, and I don't think they should be cut down. They are most of what's being removed from the Hoosier now to get us back to native species. My personal feeling is that certainly not Roundup, especially. I mean, too much evidence that Roundup is a killer.
Okay, I have another question in the chat. Steve, could you explain, sorry, this is from Bowden Quinn. Steve, could you explain more about what you mean by rewilding Southern Indiana? Sorry, rewilding in Southern Indiana. Any chance we could get elk back?
For those of you who don't know, Bowden is actually the director of the Hoosier Group Sierra Club. He's a good friend of mine. Yeah, I mean, by rewilding, basically, like I said, I think what happened in the Hoosier is about as much rewilding, turning it back to nature, as we're going to be able to do, other than buying little pieces of land here and there, like the land trusts in the state of Indiana are doing. I mean, we can still do a lot of that, but in terms of creating a large wild place in Indiana, the Hoosier National Forest is it. There's really no other place that it could be done. And I would also add that the Hoosier actually adjoins many, many properties. Morgan Monroe State Forest up here, Brown County State Park. So the Hoosier is sort of a foundation of much bigger, wilder areas.
Okay, looks like we have a comment from Joyce. The linking trails that were mentioned are something that Governor Holcomb is promoting.
Good for him. You know, it's interesting because some of the greatest, given the blue-green or the red-blue divide today, Republicans have been some of the best environmentalists and preservationists in the history of the world. Richard Nixon signed all of the great environmental laws: clean air, clean water, national forests. Richard Nixon signed all those laws. Richard Lugar was instrumental in establishing the Charles C. Dean Wilderness Area. So my hat's off to Governor Holcomb for continuing that Republican tradition of supporting natural places in Indiana.
Oh, okay. Someone is saying it would be nice if the remainder of your slideshow could be added at the end of today's recording for us to view later on the channel. Well, I will tell you, Jamie, I do not know how to do that with a Zoom recording. If anyone wants to carry on our talk today, we do have 5 minutes left. So Steve, if you are amenable to go ahead and show the rest of your slideshow, we can go past one if that is okay with you. And then we'll have that material in the Zoom recording that we will then upload to YouTube within a few days.
Great, and I won't stop and talk over. I'll talk over it, but I won't stop so you can see the rest of it here.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, we've only got 2 minutes and 45 seconds left. So this is Kings Ridge, just a random drive I took in Lawrence County. Hickory Ridge is that. This is a horse trail down in Jackson County, or Orange County. I mean, Beaver Creek is in Lawrence County. Beautiful little valley down there. As you can see, I made sure to cover all of the seasons. Shirley Creek is a horse trail in Orange County. Dogwoods in the springtime. Blue flag iris, I'm pretty sure I'm not a naturalist. I have a good naturalist who's helped me with these things. Budding dogwoods. This is Jesse Kirkham from the Sierra Club hiking on Andy Mahler's land down in Orange County in Youngs Creek. Pawpaw Marsh is a flooded area on the Lost River in Martin County. These are Dutchman's Breeches down in Martin County, a remote up part of the forest down there. Otter Creek, this is a little place down in Crawford County that was built for waterfowl. The Anderson River, my friend Cheryl Munson, who I showed earlier, the archaeologist, she scoffs at the Anderson River as actually being a river. It's really just a creek. This is one of the Ohio River feeder rivers down in southern Indiana. Bird's Eye Trail, I think this is about a 20-mile trail. You see all the old pine trees. The Little Blue River down in Crawford is one of my favorites. Very wild down there. German Ridge is an old settlement. It's got some outbuildings there. These amazing rocks that are really hard to photograph because of the shadows. German Ridge is a large recreation. Now we're down on the Oriole Trail in Perry County. There's an Oriole Trail east and west. I think it's about 12 miles. In addition to Indian Salina, there's a couple of other recreation areas, Tipsaw Lake, and Saddle Lake. These are all along Highway 37 in Perry County, south of the interstate. Small little fishing holes, camping, hiking, trails. And then Mogan Ridge. Mogan Ridge is sort of the Dean of the South. Mogan, we really wanted Mogan included in wilderness. It didn't make the cut at the end. But as you can see, it's a beautiful place to go for fall colors. Mogan Ridge is also where the Rock House Hollow shelter is. If you know how to get there from Mogan Ridge, you can go see where the earliest people in America were. So looks like we finished up with 2 minutes to spare, I think.
Very good. Do we have any other questions or comments for our speaker, Steve, today?
Yes, I have a question. I'm limited for health reasons. Can you recommend areas that have trails that are level and flat and not strenuous?
Actually, I can, and those are included in both of my books. Have accessible trails and accessible places. I can't think of any off the top of my head right now that I could just share with you right now. But both of my books have lots of those in them. There are many places in Indiana where they have accessible trails. And I just can't think of any right now. Most of the developed recreation areas have some places where you can that are accessible.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
And Steve, we're getting some nice comments in the chat. Everyone's saying thank you for your presentation today.
Well, thank you all. Thank you again for inviting me. It was a pleasure to share the Hoosier National Forest with you. If you have any questions, any thoughts, anything you want to share with me, again, bloomingtonalternative@gmail.com, or just go to my website and you should be able to reach me through there.
And I did put Steve's Gmail address in the chat, as well as the website for the naturalbloomington.blog. But you can certainly email me at the Carnegie Center. You can send it to info@carnegiecenter.org if you need that information beyond our program today. We'll be glad to help you with that and get you in touch with Steve. Absolutely. All right, let me check the chat for anything else. Lots of thank yous. Thank you for your commitment to the environment. Thank you for sharing your beautiful photos with us. This was very enjoyable. Very nice presentation, wonderful presentation. Thank you, etc. And again, we will have this full presentation uploaded to our YouTube channel. You can just look for the Carnegie Center on YouTube, and we'll have that up within the next few days. So if there's, I'll do one more ask for any other questions for Steve Higgs today. Okay, all right, well, we will go ahead and close out. Thank you everyone so much for being here for the Carnegie Center's Lunch and Learn program today with our speaker, Steven Higgs, on the natural state of Indiana. So thank you all so much. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
Thank
Bye.
you.